Welcome back to another deck profile video. Today's video we are updating Aegisdramon. If you would have seen my last deck profile video with Plesiomon, you would already be aware that we're going to touch base with this deck. As for the avian deck I'm building, the cards are still not yet arrived, so once they have turned up, that'll be the next video. But for the meanwhile, let's just dive straight into this. So the deck has been tweaked quite a bit, and if you've seen the previous video for this deck, you'll see what's been taken out, what's been put in. But starting with the eggs, not really any changes. It's just 4 of the BT7 Plesiomon. It's inherited. If you play out a Digimon from one of your sources, you gain 1 memory. I still think this is a solid card for this deck. You can use alternatives if you want to use the new, a 1 restricted of the other Plesiomon from BT15. There's no harm in throwing that in anyway, because it's only going to be 1 card anyway. Alternatively, you could use things like Wanyamon from BT11. But for me personally, in this build, this is the best egg to run. Moving on to our level 3s, we have a 1-of Madokimon and a 1-of Syakomon. For obvious reasons, Madoki is obviously a memory blocker, so your opponent can only gain memory through Tamers. And Syakomon is essentially one of the training blockers. Your opponent can't reduce Digivolution costs. So we run a 1 each of those. In relation to other rookies that we've run, throughout the remainder, it's pretty much Gomamon Online, really. But the next, we run a 3-of the BT7 Gomamon, where when played from Digivolution cards, you get to draw 2 cards. It's a solid card to have in your hand at the beginning of the game. And essentially, if you're able to, you can play it out on turn 2 and draw an extra couple of cards just to get things going. But just a 3-of is, I'd probably say, enough for this right now. However, you're welcome to work on the ratios yourself if you want to play a full play set of it. The next Gomamon we run is none other than the one from BT14, where its start of main effect is that you can trash 1 Digivolution card from one of your opponent's Digimon, and that can be any source. And alongside that, it can't be blocked for the remainder of the turn. The inherited's quite good, especially if you want to try and recycle should your Digimon die. But opponent's turn, when its Digimon would be deleted, you can play out this Gomamon from its sources. So it's actually a very good card to have, just a simple 3-of. You can possibly reduce it if you really wanted to, or increase it to 4. But again, it's really up to you on your ratios. The next 3-of that we run is Gomamon X Antibody from BT15. It's about time we finally got some search power for this deck that wasn't in the form of option cards or Tamers. And to digivolve this on top of a Gomamon for no cost to then search is exactly what this deck needed. But you get to add 1 card with the Sea Beast, Plesiomon, Beastkin, or X Antibody traits among them, and add it to your hand, and then the rest of the cards go to the bottom of the deck. It also has an inherited effect of when attacking one of your opponent's Digimon with as many or fewer Digivolution cards as this Digimon, it can't attack until the end of their next turn. So it's a very good defensive card as well, once you've progressed through the level lineup. But just a good 3-of this card. And the fact you can just play it for a free cost as well to get the search is ideal. Our last set of rookies is that of Betamon from BT15. I absolutely love this card. Its on play is, if played by an effect, one of your opponent's Digimon can't attack until the end of their next turn. So it's ideal if you don't want them to try and suspend and utilize effects when suspending, which some decks currently in the meta is, you swing, trigger the effects, and then they do a shed load of stuff. However, for me, the best part of this card is its inherited, which is the jamming, guaranteed. So whilst you obviously have the restricted Buka now, this hasn't been hit, thank God. And you can still use jamming where you see fit. But it's also just a very good defensive card in general as well, should you need to. And you'll find out that, as we progress up the ladder in this deck, you can play Digimon on your opponent's turn as well, should the odds be in your favour. But we'll get to that in a minute. So, in regard, that just concludes all of the rookies. But now moving on to the level 4s, we run quite a few different kinds. We have, to start with, a 4 of the new Aegisdramon from BT15. And now, it only has 2 effects. The first one is Rush. And that is essentially what this deck was missing. You would play out Digimon and you wouldn't have the capacity to swing. However, this card now changes that. Additionally, its inherited also gives your Digimon jamming. So you might notice by now that the aim of this deck is to use jamming, but at the same time, if you are using effects, you are going to play out this Aegisdramon. You will have Rush. If it's still memory on your turn, you're going to swing, and hope that you're in a comfortable position to swing. Otherwise, you might risk being aced or potentially hitting security bombs. But it's still a very good 4 of to have in this deck. Alternatively, you don't need 4 of if you don't want to, and you can mix and match with the next card I'm about to show you, which is, now I run just a 2 of a Aegisdramon from EX3. On play, one of your Digimon gains blocker until the end of your opponent's next turn, and if it's been played from Digivolution sources, you can select one of your Digimon to unsuspend. So what I mean by that is it has to be the same Digimon that you give blocker. So you only get to choose one target, but it gives it blocker and it can unsuspend. So normally you'll find you'll be using this with Plesiomon or Aegisdramon. Or in this case now, the new Rush Aegisdramon. So I think it's a good card to have just a 2 of. I don't think you need any more than that now, because you are primarily running the Aegisdramon stuff. However, you can mix it up. You could add 3 or 4 in there and maybe reduce the Aegisdramon rush count, but I really don't see why you would need to do that. The next 4 of that we have is that of the promotional Aegisdramon. You would have seen this in the last video. This card is just very good in general. On play and when Digivolve, one of your blue Digimon can't be deleted in battle until the end of your opponent's next turn. So it's nice if you have that jamming, you swing into security, it's suspended until the end of your opponent's next turn, unless you have an ace card. But at the same time, your opponent can't delete it, which is nice. Its inherited is also very handy. When you play a Digimon by an effect, you can give one of your blue Digimon Rush for the turn. So it's very good for aggression. Not so much when it's your opponent's turn, of course, but it's just a very good 4 of to have, I find. You may have noticed I've obviously taken out the Tobiamons, which Digivolve for 1. However, I would love to make space for it, and you could potentially take out the Aegisdramons for a 2 of maybe, but I just think with the ratios we have so far, I don't think there's enough space for it. The last level 4 I run is Lanamon, hybrid for game. When Digivolving effect, you can place a blue level 3 Digimon card from your hand underneath as the bottom Digivolution source, and by doing so you'll give her jamming. Not all of your level 3s are going to have that jamming inherited, unlike Betamon, so it's understandable that in some cases you might need to use her to to put under a Digimon from, you know, one of your level 3s. But it's just a solid one-off to have. I don't think I ran any hybrids in my last deck profile, but I just think it's also a good opportunity to end games. Level 5s. We have tweaked the ratio slightly, but not by much. 3 off to start with, Aegisdramon from EX3. It's still a very good card as part of this deck. When attacking, you get to play out a level 3 blue Digimon from one of your Digivolution sources. It doesn't have to be Aegisdramon's line, but any others. So that's quite handy to have as an effect, and its inherited is exactly the same. So you can do it with level 6s or higher. As you swing, you get to play out more Digimon. You can just swarm the board if you need to. But just a solid 3 off of him is ideal, because at least then you can try and maximise some of the level 3 effects that you do have. The next 3 off that we do is Aegisdramon from BT11. I still think this is a very good card. I think in my last video I only ran 2. Don't hold me to that though, but I think 3 in this particular deck is ideal. On play and when digivolving, you can play a blue or a purple level 3 Digimon from one of your sources. So it's ideal. I mean, don't get me wrong, the 4 cost for digivolving is quite expensive, but that's why you have training cards. You can reduce the effect. You'll have Bukamon as well to gain you another memory. So in some cases, it'll only be able, you'll be digivolving for a cost of 1 in theory. So I just think having 3 of these is ideal. And its inherited is also very handy as well. It's an all turns effect once per turn. When you play a Digimon by an effect, you get to gain a memory. So it's a good defensive card as well as an aggressive card, especially when linked with the Aegisdramon. If your opponent plays a Digimon, all sorts of effects are going to go piling on. But just a good 3 off of the 2 Aegisdramons that you've seen so far is ideal. And then the last level 5 that we run is a 2 of Aegisdramon Ace. This card is still just very good. Bear in mind, obviously, we've had some new Ace cards come out in BT15. None of, with the exception of Aegisdramon being blue, there weren't any others. But I still think this card is decent for this deck. Alternatively, you could run that Garurumon Ace card. You get to trash a card in your hand when you digivolve, but at the same time, it has that all turns effect. That's I think it's a your turn effect, where you could choose one of your opponent's Digimon and they can't suspend until the end of their turn. So it's you could do one of either, or you could throw in 2 of one or the other. But for me, I think Aegisdramon Ace is much more preferred for this deck, especially being a Sea Beast as well, which is just ideal in general. And the fact that you can strip sources and then bounce Digimon back to hand is ideal as well. It's also searchable with the new Gomamon X antibody card as well. So it's, I would imagine, in theory, everybody should be using Aegisdramon Ace as opposed to Garurumon. That's it for the level 5s, but we move on into our level 6s. Not much has changed. However, we'll get straight into it, but we run a 4 of Plesiomon from EX3. When digivolving, you get to play a blue level 3 Digimon or a level 4 Digimon with Sea Animal or Aqua in its traits from one of your sources. And then the secondary part of that effect is that you can then place any blue Digimon card from your hand as its bottom source. As Plesio's bottom source is. But basically, its all turns effect is what this card is really all about. It has a bounce effect. If you play out a Digimon from one of your sources, you can bounce the same level Digimon that your opponent has in play back to the bottom of their deck. So it's a very good defensive card. Eventually, when you get up to the level 6, obviously at this point, you'll either have one big stack or you're going to have a couple of Digimon already in play. Ideally, the aim of this particular card is to manage what is underneath the sources of all of your Digimon on the board, so you can choose the right Digimon to play out and bounce cards on the opponent's side of the field. So it is a very good card, and you have to think when you're using this. But overall, it's just a solid 4 of in this deck. You need to have 4 of in this, I find anyway. The next card I run in terms of the level 6s, which will finish off the level 6s, is 2 of the Plesiomon X Antibody. Now, in my last video, you would have seen it was Aegisdramon that I ran a 2 of from BT2, I believe. And don't get me wrong, you probably still could. You could still run that card if you wanted to. Because it's good at bouncing anything level 4 or under, and you can choose up to 2 targets. However, this Plesiomon, the reason why I'm running 2 of is because of its opponent's turn effect, as well as its when digivolving. So when digivolving and when attacking, I add, it's once per turn you return one of your opponent's Digimon with as many or fewer Digivolution cards as this Digimon back to your opponent's hand. So immediately you can bounce something on a swing, or when you're digivolving. Now, the opponent's turn effect is that when an opponent's Digimon with as many or fewer Digivolution cards as this Digimon attacks, if you either have the Plesiomon or X Antibody in its Digivolution sources, then you gain 2 memory. So it's basically a built-in ice wall. Now, it's, you only Digivolve for a cost of 2 on top of Plesiomon, which in some cases it can be expensive, but that's why we run the training cards. And the reason why it's a 2 cost is because of those effects that it has inherited. So it's just a very good 2 of to run, and it has saved me in some test matches. But that's all I run for the level 6s. But that new Plesiomon is, it's insane. Next up, level 7s. Just a 3 of Aegisdramon. I wouldn't run anything less than 3. I don't think you'll find it otherwise, or not as frequent or as often. 4, I think, is too much. If you have 4, it normally appears in your hand, and there's going to be a lot of the time where you don't necessarily need it at those given times. So, 3 seems to be a good count for me. Like I said, feel free to mix and match your ratios as you see fit. But this card, it just remains, it is the boss Digimon for this deck for a reason. You Digivolve, you get to play out either a blue level 3 Digimon, or a Digimon with Seedramon in its name, or a Digimon with Sea Animal or Aqua in its traits. You can basically play anything that runs in this deck. And, you only get to do it once, but it's ideal. And then essentially the opponent's turn can let you do it again if your opponent plays a Digimon. It doesn't have to be through an effect, it can just be hard played. But as soon as your opponent plays a Digimon, you can activate Aegis's, when Digivolving effect again. And, combo that with the Plesiomon from EX3, you can basically select any target that you'll have in your stack, you play it, you then bounce that, the same level Digimon that your opponent has. So it's a good defensive card. 14,000 is also, it's still quite high. You have to remember this deck is not exactly super strong in comparison to other decks. You've got Wargreymon that can swing with Raid, etc. But the aim of this deck is to, build a board full of sea animals. And using jamming just comes incredibly handy alongside Rush. So it's, don't expect to be winning all of your matches. Don't expect to be winning against meta decks. But, this deck I've built purely on the basis of having a laugh, having fun. And the deck as a whole still runs quite well. So it really is up to you whether you throw in much stronger cards such as Def X, or if you want to throw in Omnimons for any reason. But for me, this is how this deck should be built. It's not supposed to be super strong. It's supposed to be fun, and that's exactly what I get out of this deck. Next up, we have the Tamers. Just two Davis. It's a memory setter, so you go to 3 every turn, and it's also a searcher. So I mean, it's a 4 cost to play. It's fine. Everyone has a 4 cost Tamer with a memory setter, so it's fine. On play, you get to reveal the top 3 cards. You can add a blue and a green Digimon card among them to your hand. We obviously only run blue, so you're only going to choose 1 target. You'll find it doesn't really whiff that often. I'd be very surprised if you do, based on the amount of option cards that we run and the amount of Tamers. But just a 2 of a Davis is nice, because a lot of the time you're not really going to be using him anyway. And then in relation to our last but not least, we have option cards. So 2 of Sorai. This card is still pretty bonkers, even in today's meta. You strip the top 4 sources from one of your opponent's Digimon, and then any of your opponent's Digimon without sources, they can't attack until the end of his turn. Now, I find it's very relevant to have this card at the moment, as a lot of boards, a lot of decks like to play wide, and just having 2 of these makes me feel a little bit more comfortable in delaying my opponent for at least another turn. Whether that means I'm being careful and building a stack in the back, and maybe just getting that additional turn to get to my level 6 or 5s. Alternatively, it could just delay your opponent and give you the time you need to get yourself managed and ready to sort of reply. So I find a 2 of these is fine. Certainly a must, I would imagine. The next 2 cards I run are Blue Memory Boost. We all know what this card does, but in short, you get to reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, and then you get to choose 1 blue Digimon among them and put it in your hand rather. Its delay effect lets you gain 2 memory. Security effect, you just play this card into your battle area if hitting security. Running 2 of these is, I think, necessary, because you're not always going to have Gomamon X antibody in your hand, and it's just an additional source for you to use in terms of search power. The last 2 option cards I run, I'd add 2 of the mental training. Again, if you're not familiar with this card, you get to reveal the top 2 cards instead, and you get to choose any blue card and put it in your hand. So it's stronger than the Blue Memory Boost. However, you are limited with having only 2 cards to choose from instead of 4. The delay effect essentially reduces the next Digivolution you do for a cost of 2. So this is what I mean by, you can use this card as part of your Digivolution into Plesiomon X antibody, or you can use it to maximize the potential of Aegisdramon. Or potentially you could, if, for example, you had a level 3 in play, and you needed that extra 2 memory, you needed to find the additional 2 memory to Digivolve your level 3 into a certain Aegisdramon with Rush for no cost to go for game, then that's something you can do as well. Pop this, Digivolve into Rush Aegisdramon, and then just swing for game. So there are a lot of opportunities you can use with this card. Alternatively, you could swap out the 2 blue mem boosts I've previously shown for an extra 2 of these, but it's ultimately up to you, and sort of what your thoughts are and how you like to play this. So, but for me, that is this particular deck that I run. I don't think this deck's going to get much stronger for a while. I mean, it would be nice if we had an Aegisdramon ace card at some point, but yeah, I imagine that'll probably be on the agenda soon. Or here's hoping, at least. There are some other techie type cards that you could run. Some good examples would be, things like Great Maelstrom, if you prefer the whole bottom deck option and placing Digimon cards underneath others. So this one here from BT12. The reason why I've taken it out is just purely on the basis that it can cost you 6 memory to play. And I'll be brutally honest, I mean, I ran a 2 of, and it was very, very rare that it ever got hit in security, and I never, it never appeared when I wanted it to, so I've kindly taken it out and replaced it with Saurai. But that's just one of a couple of certain options you could play. Alternative hybrid cards you could consider Kumamon. You know, when Digivolving, you get to trash one of your opponent's bottom sources. So it's, you know, it's another hybrid for game if you really wanted to run that instead of Lanamon. However, for me, personal preference would be Lana at this point in time. The Tobiamons that I mentioned earlier are another good example. You know, it Digivolves for 1, or you can play it out for a cost of 3, which is, you know, the same cost as a level 3 would be. So I think for now I'm keeping my ratios as they are. However, if, you know, gameplay continues, and it may well be that, you know, I might throw in 2 of the Tobiamons and take out the Aegisdramons, or I might, you know, take 1 out of each of the Aegisdramons just to make room for this. But for now, I'm happy with my ratios, but you could run 2 or even 3 of these if you prefer a much less Digivolution count and a potential memory choke against your opponent. Level 3s, you could still consider running Crabmon if you really wanted to from EX3. You know, you get to play it, it gives one of your Digimon jamming for the turn. If it's been played by a source, you can then put a blue level 5 or lower Digimon from your hand underneath that same Digimon as its bottom source. So again, it's good for, you know, recycling. But for me, in terms of game testing, I much prefer the Betamon than Crabmon. I'm a big fan of jamming. I love jamming, and the fact that, you know, Betamon is not just a generic vanilla card with jamming inherited, and it actually has an effect that can be useful, is actually quite handy. So for me, I mean, you could choose to throw in Crabmon if you really wanted to, but for me, it's not necessarily the case right now. I don't have the card on me at the moment. However, I'll show it in the video, but the next alternative tech option you could use would be Kaisernail. You know, it's a stupidly strong card for this deck. It only costs 4 memory to play, and you can play out any blue source from under one of your Digimon. So you aren't just limited to your level 5s or lower. You can bring out the Plesiomon or the X-Antibody Plesiomon if you really, really wanted to. I just find, you know, Kaisernail could probably be used in conjunction with Plesiomon X-Antibody, so long as it's got the inherited Plesiomon underneath, instead of then having to wait to go into Aegisdramon. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's up to you whether you run them. I think if you were to play those, you know, Kaisernail in this deck, you'd want maybe 1 or 2 off. But I think the option cards I run in this are enough. You know, you've got your defensive cards already in the form of Saurai, and then you've also, you know, got your searching option cards and memory gains or reductions. I don't think Kaisernail is needed. However, it has been handy in the past, but it's just something to consider. But that's it for this particular deck profile. The next video, as I mentioned earlier, will be Avian, so it should be along the lines of Phoenixmon. I am just waiting for 3 more cards to turn up before that video goes underway. So thank you, as always, for watching these videos. Feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. All the support is always appreciated. And then lastly, you know, leave your feedback on this deck. Let me know what kind of spicy tech you throw in, or any recommendations that you might suggest that I haven't already mentioned in this video. You know, I'm always open to ideas. I'm always open to, to deck building. I like to keep things fun and creative, and that's exactly what I think I've done here. But I'm always open to feedback, and I love hearing what others have to say about what they are throwing in and the reasons why they throw it in. So yeah, as always, feel more than welcome to leave some feedback or comment on the video, etc. But thank you all again for watching, and take care.